Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Research Skills Refresh, our webinar series. My name is Liz Kubota. I am the Instruction and Outreach Librarian here at the Thompson Library. And today's topic is on using images in academic projects. So we're going to cover quite a few things. We're going to briefly go over images and some foundations of copyright and licensing. Just to set the stage, this is a disclaimer that I am not a lawyer and anything that I say cannot be used as legal advice. But I will just cover some basics and some things to think about as you are looking at and trying to use images in your own work. Then we'll cover finding images and actually go through and look to, and also do some demos on actually how to find images that you're able to use. We're going to talk about using images, talk about citing images, and then finally land on creating images. And I will say that all of this most of this information, I should say, is available on the library's website through the Using Images in Research and Presentations guide. So this is, I'll again put this link a little bit later on in the chat too. Okay. So copyright applies to any idea that is expressed in a fixed format, which includes all types of images. So whether it is hand-drawn, whether it is created on your camera or with an actual phone, whether you are painting with acrylics or oils or anything like that, you own a copyright to it. I will say that images generated by artificial intelligence, as of right now, this is March 2024, the Copyright Office has stated that anything that is solely created by generative AI cannot be copyrighted. So if you create something in DALL-E or Midjourney or something, there's no copyright attached to that. But anything that's created by a human that's an image, you typically has a copyright applied to it. And so this even accounts for images that are freely available online a lot of the time, unless they have a specific license that is attached to them that kind of gives you some more use. And so when you're looking to use images that are found online or in other kind of repositories or things, there are a couple of different options that you can use to get the rights to use this. So you can ask for or purchase a license or possibly negotiate some usage rights from the creator or the company that owns that. That can often be a little bit expensive to do and is probably only for those kind of high tier publishing like art books or other types of full official publishing documents. A lot of the time you're going to be relying on fair use in order to create or use images in your projects. And truthfully, a lot of the uses I see for like student use would fall, in my opinion, under fair use. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But probably the best way and safest way to go about using images in your academic projects is to rely on finding images with Creative Commons licenses or are in the public domain. And we'll get into what exactly that is in just a second here too. All right. So as a reminder, fair use is the legal limitation on the rights of a copyright holder. And these limitations allow others to use portions or possibly the whole of a work without seeking permission first. This is laid out in Section 107 of copyright law. It specifically mentions purposes that are favored in fair use, including criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, and research and scholarship. So a lot of that is going to kind of fall under the first of the four factors, the purpose and character of the use. So what are you going to be using it for? And so since most academic projects are kind of falling under that research and scholarship section, it is a count in your favor that you would be using an image. However, not all academic work is considered fair use. So when you are looking at this, it's kind of what's called a balanced application of the four factors, which include the purpose and character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, so things that are factual and less creative are typically seen as, and any reuse of those is typically seen as more fair, coming down from court cases that we've seen. The amount and substantiality of the work, so how much of the work are you using? And also you have to kind of try to take into account any effect on the potential market or value of a work. So not just the actual stated value of a work, but the potential market or value is there. So this is just a really brief overview. I do go into this a little bit more in another webinar that I do, but we've got a bunch of help on our library website, and the Ann Arbor Library Copyright Office also has some great resources as well. So I mentioned finding works that are in either the public domain or have a Creative Commons copyright office or license on them. So the public domain, this is basically, it's kind of this imaginary space where all the creative materials that are not protected by any intellectual property laws kind of exist. So IP laws like copyright, trademark, and patent, anything that is kind of outside of those, not protected by those, kind of falls into this imaginary area called the public domain. Okay. How do you tell if something is in the public domain? It can be a little bit tricky because copyright law is very complex. So right now, anything that is published or was published or registered with copyright in the United States before 1929 is in the public domain. So this past year, January 1st is known as Public Domain Day, and in January 1st, 2024, there were some historic figures or like major characters that kind of came into the public domain. So the images of Steamboat Willie or Mickey Mouse as Steamboat Willie, those are in the public domain now because they were originally came out before 1929 and they've kind of fallen out of copyright. I think also Winnie the Pooh that character came into the public domain this year as well. So this is kind of it's a cycle that kind of things come in as copyrights expire, basically. There's also this little kind of weird time period in kind of the middle of the century that anything that was published in the US without an official copyright notice between 1929 and 1977. And 1977 is kind of when copyright law got a big refurbishment. Anything that was published without that notice is in the public domain. Works that were created by a US government officer or employee as part of their official duties are in the public domain. So that's anything that's any law, that's any website, that is any image, that is any graph or report, anything like that should be in the public domain. And most states' government's works are also considered in the public domain. It does vary a little bit state by state. And then there are works that are dedicated to the public domain by the creator. So if you create a work and say, hey, I don't actually want to like deal with my copyright, I want to give this to everybody to do with it as they will, you can do that as a creator as well. And so these are just 4 really easy examples that kind of are able to tell if something's in the public domain or not. There's actually a kind of chart through Cornell, which I can show you in a little bit, that shows how to kind of determine if things are in the public domain. And actually, let me pull that up now. So I'm switching over to our images in research and presentations LibGuide here. And if you go under using images, I talk a little bit about fair use. There's this great video from the Copyright Office that goes into it. And then if you scroll down here, there is some information about the duration and formalities of copyright and some public domain tools that are here. The copyright term in public domain in the United States from the Cornell guide, this is the one I've been talking about. And it is, again, their guide that talks about, works that are kind of registered or published, and it goes through and gives you timeframes in the United States. It also talks about international copyright in public domain. So it can get really complex kind of thinking what is in the public domain or not. Okay. So there are options to kind of look for and find things as well with that. All right. Probably the easier way to tell if you can use something is if it is licensed, and the Creative Commons licenses are probably the most well-known, and personally the easiest to kind of at least try to understand how you can use something. And these Creative Commons license can be put on pretty much anything that can be copyrighted. So textual, visual, audio, image, anything again that could hold a copyright can have a Creative Commons license put on it as long as the creator says so. So these are kind of a series of licenses that, allow more use beyond what is allowed by copyright, and without you having to without a user kind of having to go through and figuring out if their use would be fair use or not. Okay. You can tell what it is you can tell if it has a CC license by looking for either an icon or kind of an attribution statement. So CC BY, so that's a Creative Commons license. BY means you just have to give credit to the creator, right? And you can do anything else you want to it. You just have to kind of say that I am adapting work that was originally created by this person, right? CC BY share alike means that you have to give credit to that initial user, or you can and then anything that you create with or adapt from it has to go under that share alike too, has to go under that same kind of Creative Commons license. There's a couple others in here, so non-commercial or no derivatives. So no derivatives I don't really think is really useful here, because you can't actually republish it or anything. You can only kind of just copy or distribute it. You can't really reuse it again. And the non-commercial is also a little bit tricky, because depending on what your use is, it could be considered commercial by some, but not commercial by others. So personally, I look for anything that has just a CC BY or a CC BY share alike attached to it. And those are going to be the broadest and most useful licenses to look under. There is another Creative Commons license, which is just putting it out into the public domain. So again, anything that has that CC 0 public domain license, CC BY share alike, those are going to be the best ones to look for as you're going through. So let's actually talk about how do you find these images. So there are a couple of large repositories of images, or even search engines. So we'll talk about looking through Google Images, Openverse, which is the Creative Commons search, and then as well as going into Wikimedia Commons. But then on our guide here, we actually do have quite a few different options for you to look through. So again, on the images, we're going to be using Finding though. So we'll start with Google. So Google Images is basically just Google search engine, but just under the images. And once you actually get into a search here, and we'll just do a search for cupcakes, because who doesn't like cupcakes? Once you get onto the results screen, if you go up to Tools underneath the search bar, you can actually say, oh, I want it in a certain size, color, a different type of drawing. You can sometimes even get something that's recent, but we're most concerned about usage rights here. And you want to say that, oh, I want Creative Commons licenses. So Google will try to pull out any image that does not have a Creative Commons license associated with it. And you should start to see a lot of things that are coming from Flickr, from Wikimedia Commons, from Pexels, there's a couple of other kind of large repositories that are out there that use it. Now, it is always a good idea to actually click on the link and not just look at the copyright, but also visit the site. So why is this one coming up here if it has a copyright notice under it? So if I visit the site, I'm going to be looking for anything that talks about a licensing. So here's this lovely image that I was looking at, and I'm going to scroll down, and it's, a basic recipe blog here, and I'm not seeing anything that is powered or gives me license to use this again. So I'm not seeing anything. Let me scroll all the way to the bottom here. Hold on. Yeah. So it's copyright 2024. It's not giving me anything that talks about, a CC or Creative Commons license at all here. So this is why when you're looking with Google, always double check the licensing rights that you're looking for, and don't just trust. Hold on a second as it reloads. There you go. So yeah, this is a reason why it is always a good idea to actually go through and check to see if these licenses, if these images do have that actual license. But again, some of them like Flickr are going to be a little bit easier. So if I want to visit that site, Flickr and other photo sites like this will often give you some indication down below the images, right? So there are some rights reserved, and I can actually like click on here and see what this creator, which is Pink Cow or Dixie Belle Cupcake Cafe, has given me a attribution no derivatives. So this is an older Creative Commons license, but it says, okay, I can use it, but I can't make any derivatives. I can't change this in any way. And there should be some kind of language about what this is, what you can do with it. Okay. So again, double checking within Google searches what the actual licenses are, because they could be really restrictive, or they could, just be an incorrect cataloging by Google, or incorrectly kind of found by Google. Okay. So the open verse with Creative Commons, so these are going to be assured that you have a particular Creative Commons license on it. Now, it could be any of the Creative Commons licenses. So for example, if we're just going to do Cupcake again, and I can actually look to say I want images or audio, which we're going to limit at images here. And what I like about the Creative Commons license is that you can actually see it, but then you can also do some filters. So if I want to make sure that I have filters that are either with a public domain bar with that CC0, CC by share alike are all here. Or if I am going to use this commercially, maybe I want to say, hey, can I use this commercially? So there are these kind of filters that are really nice on this particular option here. So for example, I want to make sure that I've at least had the CC by or CC by share alike. Put a couple of filters on there. There are the other ones in here too. And I'm still getting a lot of things that are kind of pulling back here. So if I wanted to grab, let's say, ooh, this picture is nice. It'll say here's credit the creator, and I have to share adaptations under the same term. So if I was going to include this in anything, or I needed to like change it up at all, I would need to again credit that creator. And it even gives me some options on how it should credit the creator. So there's this rich text version. I can grab an HTML version of it, or I can even grab the plain text. So in case like if I'm going to be putting this in print rather than distributing digitally without these hyperlinks, I can do that. Okay. And then again, get me this image is going to be where I can download. And most of them are going to be coming from kind of Flickr. So Openverse is a search platform that it doesn't actually hold any of the kind of files through it. So you're going to have to go through, get me this image and kind of pull in there. So Openverse is really nice to kind of search across multiple platforms. So again, it'll Flickr and PhotoBucket and some of the other large kind of photo sharing platforms are where you're going to see a lot of this. The other place that I really like to look for things is in, you can actually like go directly to Flickr in the Commons and search in there. But I also do like going into Wikimedia Commons. So especially for like images of news events, famous people, this kind of things, where often the photos of this are going to be owned by, say, Getty Images or AP Images, which again, you often have to have a license in order to use. Wikimedia, you can kind of get away around that a little bit. So we'll start with Cupcake just as an example here. And you will be able to pull out all of these different images of cupcakes. And again, on a Wikimedia thing. So say I wanted this lovely image here. I can show you that, say, here's the creator. It's under a Creative Commons 0 public domain dedication, right? And so if I go to more details, it'll give me more details about this particular image and where I can actually download it in a couple of different ways. And it'll explain a little bit about what this license means as well. Now, I mentioned searching for, historic events or other kind of famous people. So we'll just choose one of my favorite examples, Lady Gaga. And so these are all images of Lady Gaga that have been uploaded to the Commons here. So if I wanted to grab this picture of Lady Gaga at the inauguration, for example, we can see who has uploaded it, where this Creative Commons attribution is, and again, shows you kind of what you can do with this particular image as well. And you can even see some other versions that maybe came through. And so, for example, I'm here free to share this and to remix as well, as long as I give proper attribution to this. And again, I can download it directly from Wikimedia Commons through the download option here. So for things, so those are three of the kind of large platforms where you can find things. So I prefer Openverse, going directly to that, and then maybe going into the Wikimedia Commons, just because pretty much all of the content within those can be reused in some way without having to kind of go through and really double check licensing like you would in Google image search or even in Flickr sometimes. I will say though that there are a lot of other repositories out there that talk about that allow free use. So if you're looking for kind of stock images or kind of modern photographs to use, I personally love Pixabay and Unsplash. These are great places to go and look, and most of them are kind of freely available. Again, without any kind of licensing on them. If you're looking for stock images of diverse people, so not just your standard white middle-aged man or woman, you can go in and you can definitely see some people who are, that are older, who have disabilities, who are in the LGBTQ community, and then also who are of, BIPOC as well. If you are looking for kind of fine art images, there's a lot of places and museums even that do allow image or have images that are in the public domain or are licensed or freely licensable through a variety of things. Art Store is one that we have through the university that only allows it for kind of academic work and doesn't allow it to be republished. But going into things like the British Library, the New York Public Library, National Gallery of Arts, these are all places to go. Historical photographs, Smithsonian Open Access is great. New Old Stock is one of my favorites. The U.S. National Archives actually has a huge Flickr account. And again, this is not just like old-timey photos. This is images of the current day president, or a lot of the time is what comes up here. Though we do have a bunch of old-timey photos in here. But if I wanted to actually kind of look in here, I can do a search and make sure that I'm here and search for Biden, for example. Oh, no, hold on. I think for Obama. Let's try Obama. Oh, interesting. Usually there's a little bit more in here. All right. Don't know why it's going on. But again, there is going to be a lot of interesting information that kind of pulls up here. Again, it may not be as old-timey as it used to. For some reason, I could have sworn there's more recent stuff in there. But anyway, again, clip art things. With science images, there's a lot of great open access things. So Animal Diversity Web, MedPix is a great one to go through. NASA images is one of my favorite. I always like to sometimes throw in some crazy images that are coming from space. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of go through and find these images of what you need. And these are just a few of the ones that are out there across the web, but always be looking at what their licensing actually says when you're using it. Okay. So again, with using images, again, determine if and how you need to give attribution. If it's in the public domain, it's probably just a good idea to kind of cite the source and where you got it from. But like if their licensing requires a little bit more attribution, typically what you're going to need to include in that is the title, the author, or description of the picture, the source, so where you found it and what it's licensed under. So whether it's a CC BY or CC BY share alike, whether you found it on Pixabay or the Flickr, all that kind of stuff. It's always also a good idea to include hyperlinks to those original pictures when you're doing digital images. And a lot of the time, especially if you are doing a more formal publication or actually trying to get something printed, you might actually need a caption, and kind of use that as like an in-text citation, either in your paper or on a slide. And then if you did adapt or modify the image in any way, you're going to need to tell your audience that you did. So an example of this would be an attribution under in a caption is this Creative Commons 10th birthday celebration created by Timothy Vollmer, and it's under a CC by license. And then you can say that it was cropped from the original, right? And there's no really strict format in like kind of the universe that talks about how you need to do it, but just kind of give your best, especially if it's in like a conference presentation or something, not just in a full published aspects. Because if you are going to be using images in published work or really wanting to be kind of on top of your academic game, you're going to need to actually cite your images. So I'm going to go through APA and MLA because those are the two styles that I know the best. But if you look in the other publication or style guides, they will show there should be chapters or examples in there about how to use tables and illustrations or figures, sometimes they're called, and what an actual reference example looks like. So in this example here, chapter 7 of the APA manual talks about the use and formatting of figures. And my example over here on the left side of the screen, or on the right side of the screen, excuse me, with APA figure 1 example of stock image. So, and then the image underneath, that's what it should look like in a printed version. If you're on the slides or doing something a little bit more informal, you can often use just like a public domain site. We can then give a little bit of a caption. This isn't necessary in a published format. You're going to use the figure 1. And then there's a reference list down here. And depending on how much is in the, and again, just have that reference there. Reference examples for this and how I formatted this are in chapter 10, sections 12, 13, 14, and 15. So audiovisual works, other types of audio works, the still visual works, and then social media, including things like Instagram posts, right? So Instagram is a mainly pictorial thing, so you might need to actually cite that. And then the APA style online, if you don't have a physical copy of your manual handy, the APA style online actually does have quite a few examples here. And let me pull that up. Here we go. So under style and grammar guidelines, you can actually go into in-text site, or excuse me, references here. And then there's a huge amount of reference examples. And if you click on audiovisual media, it gives you how to cite artwork references, how to cite TED Talks, how to cite clip art or stock images, other media that you see from social media and web pages and websites. All of this is here as well. So there's some really good work or good examples online through the APA style site. Then with MLA, it's going to be pretty similar actually. So in MLA, the handbook section 1.7 is dedicated to the use and formatting of tables and illustrations. And there are some examples in the works cited pages or entries on pages 331 and through 333 of both fine and kind of still fine art and still images. And there is also this option online as to what it should look like. And again, this is the MLA Style Center. There is under citing sources, there are citations by format, and then you can actually get some works cited list entries of what it looks like. So they start off with some really common ones, so like a photograph that you viewed in person, a painting you viewed online, a picture from a magazine, and then there are a couple of other examples that you can pull from as well. But in my instance, I'm using the same photo. In MLA, if you were going to publish this in a more formal way, so like within an article, within a book, something like that, the Fig 2 stock pic, this is the kind of the caption that you'd use if you were using it in a slightly less formal way. So on like a conference poster or on slides, for example, you could do a caption like this. And then the works cited entry looks a lot like this. So again, you are able to do this pretty easily. And styles besides APA and MLA will have options to work with this as well. So a note on creating images. If you draw an illustration, take a photograph minus there's some weird copyright stuff about like taking a photo of a piece of art or another artwork or stuff that kind of gets into the weeds, and I'm not going to go into it. But if you like create a graph or a chart, you own the copyright to that item as long as you're not using generative AI, because right now, again, images created using generative AI in March 2024 cannot be copyrighted according to the US Copyright Office. I will say that if the other thing about using generative AI is that at this point in time, it should really only be used for decorative purposes, because the cautionary tale that I have linked here actually links out to a peer-reviewed journal that someone had some rat anatomy that was drawn incredibly out of proportion to the rest of its body by generative AI, and that somehow got through peer review. So interesting things going on right now. I will say that all affiliates have access to DALL-E through GPT, and then Adobe Firefly through the Adobe Creative Cloud. And again, since we're in the realm of talking about licensing and copyright and stuff, I will note that DALL-E's exact training material is unknown. So DALL-E and Midjourney and a lot of these other generative AIs, we know that they scraped data from the internet, and a lot of what is on the internet is under copyright. So some of that training material in DALL-E is probably copyrighted, and whether or not that is fair use, that is being fought in the courts right now. Getty sued Midjourney last year in 2023, fairly early on, as soon as they kind of figured out what was going on. So we'll kind of see about that. So if you are really concerned about kind of being a really good steward of, intellectual property and generative AI, Adobe Firefly says that its content is trained on licensed content such as Adobe stock and public domain content. So it is a smaller kind of portion, but they are saying, hey, we got all of our training material legally. Again, I grabbed this quote specifically from their licensing FAQ. So again, this might be something that you want to look into and see if you want to use it. So just some final considerations to think about when you're using images. So images can definitely make your projects a lot more engaging, but they need to be used properly, right? So things to think about when you are, when and why you want to use an image. So how necessary is it to my project? Am I actually commenting on it or critiquing it in some way, or is it just decoration? If you are kind of creating something, how readable is this chart or graph? Can someone outside of my discipline kind of make sense of it? Things like different colors and other kind of usability standards should be used with these charts and graphs that you're creating. And if you are going to use if the image that you want to use is under copyright, could you find something similar that is under a Creative Commons license that is more easily accessible? So all things to say that, hey, use images, but just, kind of try to use them to get the best that you can. So I will grab this link here. Hold on a second. And put that in the chat. And then we do definitely have some copyright basics that from the library that has a lot of information on it, and the actual librarians who work in the copyright office at the University of Michigan Library are great colleagues. They're wonderful people. They will be able to kind of answer you and guide you through not only using it, but also through like publishing processes, all sorts of things like that. And there should be links to the copyright guide from this using images guide as well. This tutorial will eventually get it up onto our YouTube channel. And of course, you always have the ability to contact a librarian or me specifically. So at this point in time, I'm going to open up to questions, but thank you for coming.
Thank you for watching this recorded webinar. Find upcoming webinars to register for at libcal.umflint.edu.